Okay, now, these symbols have been used throughout history to describe the universe, and they've been used by many ancient cultures. Yeah, these symbols go back thousands of years, and many ancient cultures built philosophies and faiths around these symbols. Yeah, they worshipped gods that were meant to represent these principles of the universe. Okay, now, one of the first places to look is ancient Egypt, and okay, so they had these two gods. These are their most common known gods. These are the gods Amun and Ra. Okay, so this is Ra and this is Amun. And okay, now the god Ra was its name was meant to represent the sun above our head. And now Amun, that was also meant to represent the sun, but its name actually means it translates to the hidden one or the secret one. So now, okay, on the flat Earth disk, underneath it is the black sun. So it's underneath it. We can't see it, so it's hidden. And a lot of people don't know about it, so it's secret. So this god Amun, this is meant to represent the black sun. Okay, now, Amun was also, it also represented the god of agriculture and creative force. Okay, so these two, now, even though you see here they look like they're two separate gods, but they were really thought of as one god. Yeah, they were thought of as, these two work together in unison as one. Or as I said earlier, they're thought to be two sides to one coin. Okay, now you may have seen Jesuit symbols and Jesuit logos with these three letters, this IHS. Okay, now people think this stands for the saying, Iosis hominem salvado, or Jesus the Savior of men, but it actually stands for these three gods, this Isis, Horus, Set. Okay, this is known as the Egyptian Trinity, and what you have here is, okay, this god Isis represents the moon, and Set, that's known as the Egyptian version of the god Cronus, also along with Jeb, and that name Set, so the sun above us, it sets, and its light leaves us, and that leaves with the focus of the black sun. Okay, so this god Set is associated with the black sun. Okay, now I've been talking about this black sun, and this has been described throughout history. You can look at the ancient Aztecs. Okay, now, the Aztecs, they knew the earth was flat. They described earth as a flat disk. And they used that to make the design of their calendar. So this is their calendar. And yeah, it looks like a flat disk with a hole at the center. And at this hole in the center has a god sticking his tongue out. Okay, so this calendar, so this is the flat earth with the hole at the center. And this god sticking his tongue out is the black sun. Because as I said earlier, the black sun or the black hole takes the light from the sun above us, and it goes into the hole at the center of the earth. So, yeah, so the sun's light would go into this God's mouth at the center of the earth. Okay, so now it also has to do with this. Now, many of you are Catholic or Christian. You've participated in this ritual. This is called communion, and this is done with. Okay, so a round piece of bread is placed on the tongue, and it goes into the mouth. Okay, so this represents, so the round piece of bread represents the sun, or the sun's light, going into the mouth, which is the hole at the center of the earth, and into the black sun. Okay, so now this has also been, you can also look at other cultures. Okay, so the Druids, they had a symbol called Theon's window, and it looks like a flat disc with a hole at the center. Okay, so I've been talking about this black sun, and it's associated with many gods, as I mentioned. It's associated with gods like Cronus, Set, Amun, Jeb, and it's also associated with the god Satan. Now, because this black sun, it's been given names like Satan or the black hole or the black sun. A lot of people think it's just inherently bad. It's like it's an evil thing or a bad thing. Well, that's more of just an exoteric meaning. The actual esoteric way to describe the black sun. Okay, so it takes in the sun's light and it gives this energy that shoots towards the earth and out through this hole at the center. So the way to describe it is, whether it's good or bad, it depends on the intent of who's ever using this energy. Yeah, so as I said earlier, with the many gods it's associated with, it's known as to represent creative force. So who's ever using this creative force, it depends on their intent, whether their creation is going to be good or bad. Okay, so now the ancient Romans, they hailed Satan as a god of agriculture and liberation, also the god Cronus. Now in the Mesopotamians, they had a similar god they called Baal, and again it was believed to be the god of agriculture. And the Sumerians had a god named Enlil, and that was also meant to be a god of agriculture. Okay, so now I've talked about this as above, so below principle, and so this can be seen in ancient cultures like, okay, so ancient Indian culture, they described this as above, so below principle. The way they described it is the union of the gods Shiva and Kali. Okay, so this god here, this god is Shiva, and this god here, this is Kali. Okay, so the way they described them is they had polar energies that are balanced in perfect harmony. So this has to do with the as above, so below principle. As I said, so the light hole, the sun above us, and then there's the black hole, the black sun below us. And the above, this is known as the divine masculine, and the black hole, the below us, that's known as the divine feminine. Okay, so you can also look at this. Okay, this is another symbol of the union of Shiva and Kali. Okay, so this one with the up pointing triangle, this god here, this is the up pointing triangle, Shiva. This one with the down pointing triangle, that's Kali. And look here, there's like a Star of David or Seal of Solomon looking symbol in the middle. And as you can see, the Star of David, it's really made of two triangles, one pointing up and one pointing down. So it represents these two principles, the as above, so below, or the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So this god here with the down pointing triangle, as you can see, this god looks more feminine. So yeah, that's the divine feminine. This god with the up pointing triangle, that looks more masculine. So that's the divine masculine. Okay, and so with this Star of David symbol, they have the two triangles together working in unity. And this Star of David, now many people they think the Star of David, they associate it with the Jewish faith, but it actually hasn't been used in Jewish cultures until about the 19th century. Yeah, it used to be known as Solomon's seal in Egyptian and Babylonian cultures. And okay, so now this seal of Solomon, it's always been used to represent a symbol of creative power. Yeah, this union. Okay, so you have these two gods, with the up pointing triangle and the down pointing triangle. Yeah, the as above, so below. Yeah, it's the union of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And it doesn't take a genius to know male and female together, they create life. So, okay, now I've talked about this black sun, and yeah, it takes in light, and it also shoots out this energy, this light towards Earth that comes out through the hole at the center of the Earth. Okay, now this has been talked about in history. Okay, in 1919, a man by the name of Karl Hochschifer, he founded a society called the Brothers of the Light, which later became known as the Vril Society. Okay, now, so both of these societies, they had a whole philosophy centered around the black sun and this light. So this is the Vril Society, and what they were is they were basically like an early hippie-like society, and they had a whole philosophy and a whole culture centered around the black sun and this light coming through the hole at the center of the earth. Yeah, so they refer to this light as the vril, or the astral light. Okay, now, and this actually goes back, I was talking about Egyptian cultures, and so they had this the seal of Solomon symbol with the up pointing triangle and the down pointing triangle. So the up pointing triangle, that's pointing to the sun above our head. The down pointing triangle, that's points to the black sun. And it makes, with these two triangles, it makes this hexagon shape in the middle. So that would represent the flat earth. And you see this symbol here, this is an Egyptian symbol called the Ankh. Yeah, so you have the up pointing triangle to the sun above us, the down pointing triangle to the black sun, and then this hexagon, that would represent the flat earth. And so this Ankh, that represents the hole at the center of the earth. So now this Ankh, it's been called things like, it's called the breath of life or the key of life. And it's also meant to, now notice you may have seen the symbol for the female gender sign. That's kind of what it looks like. Yeah, the symbol for the female gender. Yeah, now this symbol, it was also meant to symbolize a spring flowing with the elixir of life. So they all had this, this culture centered around this energy coming from the black sun. Yeah, so now, so it's been described as this, this light, this energy or vril light or astral light. But actually, in other cultures, it's also been described as a tree. Yeah, they called it the tree of life. So here, in this symbol, okay, so this symbol shows, it looks like there's a flat plane, and in the middle, there's a tree coming out of it. So, and here I can show other symbols. Yeah, again, it looks like there's a flat plane, and at the center, there's a tree. Yeah, so, this is known as the tree of life. Yeah, it comes out of the center of the earth, and its roots go down below the earth. Okay, so many cultures describe what's at the center of the earth in this way. In Norse folklore, they talked about a tree at the center of a flat plain, and they called it Yggdrasil. And in Hungarian mythology, they had what's called the Valakva, and they described it as a tree with its roots going down into the underworld. And in Hindu mythology, they had what's called the Ashvata, the same thing, sort of a tree of life. And in Mayan mythology, they had a tree of life at the center of a flat plain. And the Aztecs, they had a tree of life. And the Egyptians, they had the idea of the sycamore. It's a tree at the center of the earth with its roots going down into the underworld. So, many cultures used to describe it as a tree. And then later, slightly later cultures, they described it as a mountain. Yeah, so this map here, okay, in 1569, a man by the name of Gerhard Mercator, he made a map of the world with this magnetic mountain at the center. So you see all the continents here, the continents and countries, and in the middle, the circle with the mountain at the center of the earth. Okay, now in Buddhist culture and in Buddhist ancient cosmologies, they talk about the North Pole. It has a mountain with a hole, and it's in a city called Shambhala. And Turkmen tribes talked about a copper pillar that was at the navel of the earth. Okay, so it's been described as a tree of life, a magic mountain or a magnetic mountain. But they're basically all talking about the same thing, this energy coming from the black sun that comes out through the hole at the center of the earth. Yeah, so I've talked about this now. So this is like a light or an energy, coming from the black sun. But so this energy, and I described it as this. Yeah, so this energy is made of waves. They call it the sine wave. So this sine wave, this energy coming from the black sun, it's been known throughout ancient cultures, all throughout history, to be, it's been considered this creative power or this elixir of life. So this sine wave coming from the black sun, this has been known by ancient cultures to what fuels life and creates life. Yeah, all life is centered around like these sine waves, this energy. Yeah, if you study science, all living things move and function through energy. Like every part of your body, your heart, your blood, your brain. Now, what scientists and biologists have studied is the brain puts out waves of energy like this. They put out this sine wave. And as I said before, there's different frequencies, different wavelengths. Like this is kind of a lower frequency. There's not many waves, and this one is like more of a higher frequency. There's a lot of waves, but these sine waves, these are what fuels a lot of parts of your body. But what they mostly studied is your brain. Your brain puts out different energies and different frequencies similar to this, and it has to do with the different functions of the brain. Okay, now. So these different frequencies and different wavelengths are put out by the brain. Sometimes they call them brain waves, and they have to do with the different parts and different functions of the brain. Okay, now what they found is with these different frequencies and different wavelengths, they have to do with these different parts. Okay, so these different emotions and different functions. So I showed the higher frequency, the one with the more waves, kind of a more complex sine wave. Okay, now what they've studied is when the brain is putting out certain feelings and doing certain functions, it puts out these higher frequencies. Now these higher frequencies are associated with things like when the brain is feeling things like love and compassion and creativity. It puts out those higher frequency sine waves. So this is a function of the brain. They study this when the brain is feeling love and these really positive energies. It puts out a very similar sine wave that has a higher frequency. So just like I showed on that chart. Now, when I showed the chart with the one with the lower frequency sine wave, okay, they found that in parts of the brain and functions of the brain, but those are more associated with. They found that when the brain is feeling more negative energies, more negative feelings, things like fear and hate. And okay, so now this has to do with the different parts of the brain. Okay, so here you can see this is the three main parts of the brain, and they have to do with the functions and the frequencies. So these are the main parts of the brain. So here you have, this is what's called the brain stem. This is like the core, central base part of the brain. Okay, then just outside it, you have what's called the limbic brain. And then the very outer part of the brain, that's called the neocortex. And these three parts of the brain have to do with those sine waves, those different frequencies on the energies. Okay, so now this brain stem, this base part of the brain, this is really only capable of putting out the low frequencies. Putting out very, very simple, very kind of basic sine waves. So it's only capable of things like it only has functions like when you're feeling feelings of like fear and hate, and it's responsible for what's called fight or flight. Okay, so that's the brain stem. Now this first outer part of the brain, that's capable of, it functions with slightly more complicated emotions. And they kind of range from happy, sad, but it puts out slightly more complicated, slightly higher frequency sine waves. Now, this very outer part of the brain, this neocortex, that's what's capable of that puts out the really complicated, really high frequency sine waves. So that's responsible for, compassion and creativity. Okay, and also there's two main sections of it, but there's a left and right brain. Okay, now the left brain, that helps you to physically function. It basically just goes from point A to point B. It performs repetition, and it takes in and takes out information. Okay, now the right brain, that's responsible for problem solving, for like creative thinking and questioning. Okay, now you can also look at this. It's also been described this way. Okay, now those three basic parts of the brain I described. Okay, so you have the base, the central brainstem part. That's also known as the reptile brain, and they call it that because animals like reptiles, they're only capable of this very base, low frequency functions of the brain. Yeah, they're only like reptiles aren't capable of higher frequencies. They aren't capable of like compassion and creativity. Yeah, they can only put out those very low basic sine waves. So this midbrain, the first outer part of the brain, that's also known as the old mammalian. And that's capable of slightly more complicated emotions. And then this very outer part of the brain, the neocortex, they call it the new mammalian. So that puts out the really complicated, really complex high frequency waves for love and compassion. Okay, now, and you can also look at it this way. Okay, so these are other names for it, like the very core base part of the brain. They call it the amygdala, and then the first outer part, that's called the hippocampus, and then the very outer part of the brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex. So you have these ranging from the low frequency, that's the amygdala, then slightly more complicated frequencies, it's the hippocampus, then the prefrontal cortex is capable of the really complicated frequencies for love and compassion. Now, people have been studying this throughout history. Scientists and biologists have studied these functions of the brain and these different frequencies that the brain puts out, and they've developed over history. It started with early civilizations, with people being very just concerned with survival, and then they put out these low frequencies, and then they developed these parts of the brain with these higher frequencies. Now, this has been written about in history, and you can watch documentaries about this. What they found throughout history, people that have studied the brain, is that what they found is certain people have never been able to develop past this amygdala, this very basic core part of the brain, the one that can only put out the low frequency. Certain people have never been able to develop these more complicated brain waves. These higher frequencies. The parts of the brain that are capable of love and compassion. Certain people have never been able to develop that in their brain. So this has been written about. You may have heard of the writer and philosopher Plato. He wrote books about this. He wrote books called the Critias and the Timaeus. And what he did was he described early ancient civilizations where there were cities called Enoch and Lemuria. And he talked about these people. Okay, now that's where, in these cities, most people at that time did have these higher thinking parts of the brain. They were capable of these more complicated sine waves. But now, certain people were not able to function with these higher order thinking. So what happened was these only low frequency dwelling people, they begin to find ways to manipulate and sort of control people and impose their will. And it has to do with the left and right brain. Okay, so the left brain, that just physically functions, and it's able to take in and take out information. But now, what they were able to do, they were able to function, and they became they learned how to mimic and take ideas from normal people and just use them for themselves. And so they learned how to pose themselves as normal people, but they were actually manipulating these normal people and their society and their civilizations, and sort of used it to sort of impose their only base part, their only amygdala, low frequency parts of the brain. And they were able to manipulate people into only using that part of the brain. And they built a whole, what we know now today is the whole power structure around this. Okay, so what Plato said was there were certain people that only sought what people in power revel in today. They only sought out power, sex, enslaving others, and profiting from these negative energies. And basically, they imposed their will, and so they manipulated people into thinking that's what's needed, and they use these base emotions like fear and this fight or flight response, and so they used it to impose their will. And that's when these people started getting into power. All of a sudden, in these civilizations like Enoch and Lemuria, all of a sudden, for these low frequency dwelling people, temples for them were built, and that's when the sacrifice started. Yes, sacrificial killings were ordered, and this is where worship started. This is where this whole power structure of us having leaders and governments in society. So what Plato wrote was the average person didn't hunger for these like selfish indulgences. And it was after giving into this power structure that these negative energy beings, then these normal people that were, even though they used to be capable of these higher frequencies, after living and giving into this power structure, their divine essence became too diluted, and eventually these higher frequencies started waning. So that's basically how this whole power structure started in these ancient civilizations. And these lower frequency dwelling people, they manipulated normal people by using these base brain functions like fear and fight or flight. And so these people became what we know now as the pharaohs of Egypt, and like the kings and the emperors. Okay, so they learned how to act like normal people. They could use their left brain to mimic and take in and regurgitate information, but they acted like normal, loving, caring people, but they disguised their actual intent for greed and power by and they all knew about this ancient knowledge of the universe, and they used it to make people think that they are God. They were living in this power structure. They got distracted and they lost their knowledge of the universe. And so at the same time, they kept this knowledge secret. This is when this whole occult method started. And so all of a sudden, people didn't know their godlike divine power. So now, one of the most prominent pharaohs, I talked about the Seal of Solomon, that comes from the pharaoh Saul. Now, that pharaoh, his name's Saul. It's spelled Saul, but it sounds like the word for the sun, Saul. And the sun is represented by many gods. Now, he had a temple. It was called the Temple of Solomon. It sounds like Son of Man. And many of these powers and magics and this knowledge of the universe, these secrets of the universe were really explored and practiced. They learned how to use these powers to manipulate people even further. This is where rituals like sacrifices, blood magic, sex magic, and all these secrets of the universe were really examined. And many Egyptian and Hebrew kings ended up using this knowledge of the universe for their own power. But it definitely ended up in what we now know as the Roman Empire. Okay, now what happened was, different pharaohs and kings and emperors, what they would do was pit their peoples against each other. So people in these civilizations started battling. They got into wars and military attacks for their leaders. So these different kingdoms, with their religion and their pharaohs and leaders, they would compete with each other, and to see who had the biggest military power. Now, the one that ended up being the biggest military power, they all ended up being in Rome. That became the most successful military power in the world. So Rome basically took over the world in the ancient world. It's from imposing all this military power. So Rome started going to countries around the world and imposing their will and imposing their this empire. That happened until about 500 AD. Now, after 500 AD to 1500 AD, the Roman Church took over. Rome decided to switch from military power. Now that they conquered militarily, they started focusing on religion. Yeah, so now that has to do with the Bible. Now, around this time, originally the Bible, it taught these truths of the universe that I'm talking about. But what happened was it got taken over by the Roman Church. Yeah, so a lot of the Bible is interpreted, it's misinterpreted. Yeah, so a lot of Bible versions to this day, like if you have a New King James Version or a New International Version, those are actually versions put out by the Roman Church. Yeah, so they took things out, they only put in what they wanted to put in, and they changed a lot of things to confuse people with this new idea of the Roman Church. Yeah, so this all happened in what's called the Council of Nicaea. That was an organization to decide what was going to be put in the Bible. Now, one of the biggest things, probably it has to be the biggest thing that's misinterpreted in the Bible, is the gospel. Okay, so in the gospel, Jesus, he died on the cross, so he was gone for 2 days, and he rose on the third day. Well, what this is meant to tell is, it's meant to describe the winter solstice. Okay, now the sun above our head, what happens is during the winter solstice, okay, so the sun is in the middle of the sky, and it starts moving down, and it moves down during winter, and it ends up here. Yeah, so it moves from the middle of the sky down to the lower part of the sky, and it ends up on what's called the Southern Cross. Yeah, it's also called the crux. Yeah, so now the sun, during the winter solstice, it stays down by this lower part of the sky, down by the Southern Cross for 2 days, and then on the third day it starts rising back to the middle of the sky, and eventually that brings in spring and summer. So that's what the gospel is meant to talk about. It's meant to talk about the sun. Yeah, so now the way this got misinterpreted is because of this Council of Nicaea. So yeah, to this day, Christians that believe in the Bible with the story of Jesus dying on the cross, that Jesus is a man who died on a cross, it's actually a gross misinterpretation of the structure of the universe. Yeah, so this Council of Nicaea, now it was in 325 AD, they were deciding what was going to be put in the Bible for the public for access to the public. But what happened was the emperor at the time, Emperor Constantine, he conspired with Roman bishops to misguide the Council of Nicaea to replace the original teachings of the universe that were meant to be in the New Testament, and he replaced them with the doctrines of the Pharisees. Yeah, particularly Saul, who is known for using the knowledge of the universe against people. Yeah, so yeah, that's basically what happened. To this day, the Roman Church puts out a lot of the versions of the Bible, and they're misinterpreted on purpose. The Roman Church, they started focusing on religion, and they started mixing these truths in the Bible with these Egyptian and Greek occult methods of hiding the truth and like changing the truth. Now one of the now when they started doing this, they started creating military they started using sort of violent force and physical force to impose these new doctrines on the people. And so any independent ideas and beliefs or and ideas of like free will and liberty and personal sovereignty were fought with all this propaganda that the religions of the Roman Church are putting out, that their religions are what's needed for personal salvation. Now, one of the orders, probably the most well-known order for carrying this out, is what's called the Knights Templar. So here. So yeah, the Knights Templar, they were like a military arm. Yeah, they were kind of like a they were like the police and special forces of the Roman Church. So yeah, the Knights Templar, so the Roman Church ordered any interpretations of the Bible that taught the truths of the universe and any ideas of the knowledge of the universe and spirituality, they were all banned. And a lot of their writers and translators were punished or executed. Yeah, they would do things like tie their Bibles around their necks and like burn them at the stake. Yeah, so this was all carried out in the Crusades, by the Roman Church, and it was the Knights Templar that mostly did this. Yeah, so the Knights Templar, so they went around the world and did this. They went to many countries and started enforcing these new doctrines of the Roman Church. And now going around the world, they eventually ended up going to they went to the land of the Egyptians and the Hebrews, and so they went to they actually ended up in the place where the Temple of Solomon once stood. The Temple of Solomon was torn down at this time, so they actually built a temple, their own temple, where the Temple of Solomon once stood. And what they did was they found the teachings, these ancient Egyptian Hebrew teachings of the knowledge and sciences and maths of the universe, and they started using that. Yeah, they became this huge occult knowledge entity. So they, one of the ways they used it is they became some of the first usury and interest-based bankers. So they started becoming a financial power, and they offered their services to a lot of elites. So they used these knowledges of like math from Egyptian and Babylonian teachings, and they became this big financial power. And so a lot of kings and emperors ended up being in debt to them. So they became this huge financial power. Not only were they a military power, but then they became they found these Egyptian Babylonian teachings, and they became this big occult knowledge and big banking elite. So they became one of the biggest organizations in Europe at the time. So now, because of their usury banking and all the atrocities all over countries, the king at the time of France, King Philip, he ordered for their arrest and imprisoning and execution. So, and it was actually on what we now know as Friday the 13th, and that's why to this day Friday the 13th is considered unlucky. Yeah, because it's the day that the Knights Templar were arrested and many of them were executed. Yeah, that happened under the orders of King Philip of France. Now, after this point, many people think the Templars didn't exist after that, but that's actually not true. So this happened in the late 1300s. Now, in the early 1400s to 1500s, now around the world, the Roman Church was starting to take over many countries, but one of the only countries that they didn't take over was Scotland. So that was one of the only countries that was not under the rules of the Roman Catholic Church. So in Scotland, they had what was the old stonemasonry societies. Yeah, there were stonemasons, and they were basically just civil servants. Yeah, they built stone structures like buildings and houses and they offered their services to many people in the country. So they became a very successful sort of organization. Now, what happened was, it's been found in history that they were infiltrated by what was left of the Knights Templar. Okay, so what we found was, particularly in what's called the Rosslyn Chapel, all of a sudden the stonemasons, their societies started displaying a lot of Templar traditions, a lot of their initiation rituals and symbols. Yeah, that's when they started displaying a lot of the symbols from these Egyptian Babylonian occult teachings. So at this point, so what was left of the Templars, they took over the Masonry Society, the stonemasons. So as at this point, now after the Templars were busted, Now, at this point, what the Roman Church was trying to do, enforce their doctrines on everyone. Okay, now after fighting and executing so many rebels and truth tellers, and after the Templars were busted, this whole what they called the Reformation, this Roman Church takeover of the world, it wasn't working out. So the Roman Church basically decided to work on a new method, and that was to just discredit truth tellers. They wanted to, instead of using military force, they wanted to go for a more psychological method. So what the Roman Church decided to do was, their new method was basically to completely rewrite reality. And this would just make the truth sound ridiculous. They had enough power and influence in schools around in many countries, so they were able to start weaving in lies and truths about the universe. Okay, Pythagoras is considered one of the first figures to start carrying out this new method, and to this day he's considered one of the historic masters of this now Templar-run Freemason craft. Okay, and so now to carry this out, a man by the name of Ignatius Loyola, he was to be the leader of this new takeover. And the man, the scientist Nicholas Copernicus, he was a Roman Church's mathematician, and so now he gave them an opportunity, this new takeover, he gave them a perfect opportunity to start this rewrite of reality. And he's the one who actually created the spinning globe solar system Earth model. Yeah, so you can look all this up. This is where it started, with that purpose of basically making a false reality. And with this new takeover, this Roman Church's takeover of what we now know as the truth of the universe. Okay, so now Ignatius Loyola, he started the society with, okay, so it was, Ignatius Loyola, Pythagoras, and Nicholas Copernicus. They started the society known as the Jesuits. Okay, so the Jesuits were founded August 15th, 1534. Yeah, they were sanctioned by Pope Paul II, and it was created, like I said, basically for any who oppose this new Roman Church doctrine and this rewrite of reality to be destroyed. Okay, this is the Jesuit oath. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can pause it and read it yourself, or you can look it up. Okay, this is a blood oath. This is what every Jesuit has to take to join this society. So you can just Google the Jesuit oath or Jesuit blood oath. Okay, now, so in this new takeover, so it started with the Jesuits, and okay, now the Jesuits went on many missions around countries all over the world, with this new rewrite of reality, this forcing the Roman Church's doctrines, and they ended up getting kicked out of pretty much every country in the world. But people weren't accepting this ridiculous idea of this spinning globe Earth model and this forcing the Roman Church's doctrines on the world. So by 1773, the Pope at the time, it was Clement XIV, he had to suppress the order because of all this public outrage. So he decided he had no other choice. He had to hold them back because everyone was sick of these nut jobs trying to force these ridiculous ideas on the public. So at this point, they had to work on a new method, and there was a Jesuit by the name of Adam Weishaupt, and he basically led the Jesuits in a revolt to bring back this Jesuit order in the Vatican Empire after the Jesuits were expelled out of all these countries. So he started an organization in 1776 called the Bavarian Illuminati.